The iron horse screeched to a halt at Globe, Arizona's dusty platform, on a sweltering July afternoon in 1883, and Olivia Crawford stepped down with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a determination that burned hotter than the desert sun overhead. She stood there for a long moment, feeling the heat rise from the packed earth beneath her boots, watching as other passengers dispersed into the arms of waiting families or toward the rows of weathered buildings that lined the main street. Nobody waited for her. Nobody even glanced her way. The reality of her situation settled on her shoulders like the fine coating of dust that already clung to her dark traveling dress. She had exactly $7 to her name, no prospects, and no place to sleep when night fell. Behind her lay Philadelphia, and a life that had crumbled like sand through her fingers. Her father's gambling debts, the foreclosure of their modest home, his death from heartbreak and shame, her mother's passing just 3 months later. The relatives who had turned her away with barely concealed relief. The suitor who had withdrawn his proposal the moment her family's fortune evaporated. She had sold everything except the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring to buy the train ticket west, chasing whispers of opportunity in the mining territories. Globe was smaller than she had imagined, a rough collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts nestled in a valley surrounded by rugged mountains. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with hitching posts where horses stood drowsing in the heat. She could see a general store, a saloon with bat-wing doors, a hotel that looked like it had seen better days, and various other establishments whose purposes she could only guess. Men in dusty work clothes and broad-brimmed hats moved along the wooden sidewalks. A few women in simple dresses hurried about their business, most averting their eyes from the stranger at the depot. Olivia adjusted her grip on her carpetbag and started walking toward the hotel, her spine straight despite her exhaustion. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, crossing a continent that seemed impossibly vast, watching the landscape transform from green hills to endless prairies to these harsh, beautiful mountains. Each mile had taken her further from everything familiar and closer to a future she could not yet envision. The hotel clerk, a thin man with suspicious eyes, quoted her a price that would consume half her remaining money for just 3 nights. She thanked him and walked back outside, her heart hammering but her expression carefully composed. Pride would not feed her, but neither would it allow her to show the panic rising in her chest. She walked the length of the main street, noting a dressmaker's shop, a newspaper office, a church at the far end. Her practical mind cataloged everything, searching for possibilities. She could sew well enough, but the dressmaker's shop looked barely prosperous enough to support its current owner. She could read and write and figure, but there were no advertisements for teachers or clerks in the dusty windows. The saloon might need help, but the thought of working in such an establishment made her stomach turn, not from moral superiority, but from fear of the kind of attention it would bring. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not notice the commotion ahead until she heard the shouting. A wagon had lost a wheel in front of the general store, its load of lumber spilling into the street. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, was trying to shore up the tilted wagon while keeping his spooked horses calm. Several men stood watching but not helping, arguing among themselves about the best way to proceed. Olivia set down her carpetbag and walked forward without thinking. She had grown up around her father's carriage horses before his gambling consumed their stable along with everything else. She approached the horses from the side, speaking in a low, steady voice, and placed a gentle hand on the nearest one's neck. The animal's eyes were rolling white with fear, but her touch and voice seemed to penetrate its panic. She kept talking, nonsense words and soothing sounds, while stroking the horse's neck until it began to calm. "That's right," she murmured. "Nothing to fear, just a little noise and excitement. You are fine. Everything is fine." Behind her, she heard the men go silent, then resume their work with the wagon, their voices lower now that the horses were settling. It took perhaps 10 minutes before the wagon was stabilized and the horses fully calm. Olivia stepped back, suddenly aware that she was the center of attention. A dozen pairs of eyes were studying her with varying degrees of curiosity and assessment. "That was well done, miss," the wagon driver said, approaching her with his hat in his hands. "Been working with horses for 40 years, and I have never seen anyone settle frightened animals that quick. You have a gift." She felt her cheeks warm but managed a small smile. "I used to help with my father's horses. It has been a while, but I suppose they remember kindness no matter how much time passes." Truer words were never spoken. The voice came from behind her, deep and warm with an accent that spoke of long days under open skies. She turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about the West. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered beneath a faded blue shirt, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was all strong angles and weathered planes, with laugh lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. Those eyes, startlingly blue against his tanned face, regarded her with open curiosity, and something else she could not quite name. "Thomas Zimmerman," he said, extending a hand. "Most folks call me Tom. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles north of town." She placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses of hard work and the strength in his grip. "Olivia Crawford. I just arrived on the afternoon train." "I figured as much." His eyes flicked to where her carpetbag sat abandoned on the sidewalk. "Passing through or staying?" "Staying," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "I am looking for work, actually." Something shifted in his expression, a calculation happening behind those blue eyes. "What kind of work?" "Any honest work," she said simply. "I can read, write, and figure. I can sew and cook and clean. I know horses, as you just saw. I am not afraid of hard work or long hours." Tom was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but also made her determined to hold his gaze. Finally, he seemed to come to some decision. "My ranch is doing well enough that I could use help. I have been managing alone since my father passed last year, and there is more work than one man can handle. I have 15 horses right now, with plans to expand. I need someone who can help with the day-to-day care, the training, the breaking. Someone with a gentle hand who understands their nature." Hope flared in her chest, almost painful in its intensity. "I can do that. I may need to learn your specific methods, but I am a quick study and I promise you would not regret giving me a chance." "The work is hard," he warned. "Early mornings and late nights. The ranch house has a spare room you could use, so you would not have to worry about finding lodging in town. Meals included. I can pay you $20 a month to start, more if you prove yourself valuable." $20. It was not a fortune, but it was survival. It was a chance. She felt something in her chest loosen, the tight knot of fear that had been her constant companion for months finally beginning to unravel. "When would you want me to start? How about right now?" He gestured toward a wagon hitched on the other side of the street, a sturdy vehicle with 2 patient horses in harness. "I came into town for supplies. We can load up and head back before sunset, unless you have other business to tend to first." She thought of her single carpetbag, her $7, the empty stretch of uncertain days that had yawned before her just minutes ago. "I have everything I need right here. Right now is perfect. The ride north took them out of town along a dusty road that wound through increasingly wild terrain. Tom handled the horses with easy competence, his hands light on the reins. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a natural spring where antelope came to drink, a rock formation that supposedly looked like a sleeping giant, the boundary markers of neighboring ranches. His voice was easy and conversational, asking her questions about her journey west without prying into why she had made it. She found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation, charmed by his straightforward manner and the obvious love he had for this harsh, beautiful land. "I was born in Texas," he told her as the wagon rattled over a particularly rough stretch of road. "My father moved us here when I was 12, looking for better grazing and fewer crowded ranges. He built the ranch from nothing, just him and me and my mother working every day until it became something worth having. My mother passed when I was 18. My father made it to 65, which is a good long life for a man in this country. He left me the ranch and everything in it, and I aim to honor his memory by making it thrive. It must be hard, managing everything alone," she ventured. "It is," he admitted. "Not the work so much, though that can be backbreaking, but the loneliness gets to you. A ranch should have life in it, voices and laughter and the sound of people living. It has been too quiet this past year." She understood that kind of loneliness, the silence that fills a space after loss. "I lost both my parents recently," she heard herself say. "My father first, then my mother. Everything we had was gone before they were even in the ground. I came west because there was nothing left for me back east, and I heard there were opportunities here for people willing to work for them." He glanced at her, his expression softening with understanding. "I am sorry for your losses. Loss is hard, no matter the circumstances. But you are right about opportunities. The West does not care where you came from or what you lost. It only cares about what you can do now, today, with the chances you are given." The ranch appeared as they crested a rise, and Olivia felt her breath catch. It was not grand or imposing, but it had a rightness to it that appealed to something deep in her soul. The house was adobe with a wooden porch, built low and solid against the landscape. Behind it stretched a series of corrals and outbuildings, all well maintained and practical. Beyond that, she could see horses grazing in fenced pastures, their coats gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue against the enormous sky. The whole scene radiated a sense of purpose and care, a place built by someone who understood the land and respected it. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Tom's face lit with pride and pleasure. "It is home. Come on, I will show you around before we lose the light." He gave her a thorough tour, introducing her to each of the 15 horses by name and temperament. There was a tall bay mare named Juniper who was gentle as a lamb, a spirited buckskin gelding called Arrow who liked to test boundaries, a pregnant sorrel mare named Ruby who was due to foal within the month. Tom spoke about each animal with affection and detailed knowledge, and Olivia found herself studying him as much as the horses. There was a gentleness in him, despite his size and strength, a patience that showed in every movement and word. The house was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms and a small washroom. Tom showed her to the spare bedroom, which had a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It is not fancy, but it is clean and private. You can settle in while I get supper started." She wanted to protest that she should be the one cooking, but he was already heading toward the kitchen with the ease of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses on pegs and arranging her small collection of personal items on the dresser. Her mother's wedding ring on its thin chain, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. A book of poetry that had been her father's before the gambling fever took him. It took less than 5 minutes to transform the anonymous room into her space, and the speed of it made her realize just how little she had left of her old life. When she emerged, Tom had beans and bacon simmering on the stove and was slicing bread from a fresh loaf. "Nothing fancy," he said apologetically. "I am a plain cook at best." "It smells wonderful," she said honestly. "Can I help?" "You can tell me about Philadelphia," he said, nodding toward the table. "I have never been further east than Kansas City. What is it like living in a big city?" They talked through supper, the conversation flowing easily despite their newness to each other. She told him about the crowded streets and tall buildings, the markets and theaters, the constant noise and motion of city life. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really thinking about what she described. In turn, he told her about life on the ranch, the rhythms of the seasons, the challenges of horse breeding and training, the satisfaction of watching a wild, spirited animal learn to trust. "The key is patience," he said, refilling her coffee cup. "You can break a horse through force, terrify it into submission, and you will have an animal that obeys out of fear. But if you take the time to earn its trust, to work with its nature instead of against it, you will have a partner. Something with spirit and heart that will give you everything it has because it wants to, not because it is afraid not to." "You are talking about more than horses," she observed quietly. He met her eyes and smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his face. "Maybe I am. People are not so different. We all respond better to kindness than cruelty, to patience than force." That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert settling into darkness, Olivia felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not quite hope, but its close cousin. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the train that had brought her west with empty pockets might have delivered her to exactly where she needed to be. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Tom woke her before dawn that first morning, tapping gently on her door and calling that coffee was ready. She dressed quickly and found him in the kitchen, already clean-shaven and alert despite the early hour. They drank their coffee standing on the porch, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pink, and then they went to work. He was a good teacher, patient and thorough without being condescending. He showed her how he liked the horses fed, the specific mixture of grains and hay for each animal based on its age and activity level. He demonstrated his techniques for grooming, for checking hooves and teeth, for spotting early signs of illness or injury. He let her work alongside him with the gentler horses, watching carefully but not interfering unless she asked for guidance. By the end of the first week, she was handling morning chores on her own, while Tom focused on training a young stallion someone had brought for him to break. She found herself falling in love with each of the horses, learning their individual personalities and quirks. Juniper would rest her soft nose on Olivia's shoulder while being groomed, a gesture of trust that never failed to touch her heart. Arrow liked to play games, stealing her hat or trying to untie her apron strings with his clever lips. Ruby, heavy with foal, followed her around the corral like a devoted dog, seeking the gentle hands that eased her discomfort. She also found herself increasingly aware of Tom in ways that had nothing to do with horses or ranch work. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted feed sacks. The sound of his laugh when one of the horses did something amusing. The gentleness in his strong hands as he examined a mare's swollen ankle. The patience in his voice when he worked with a frightened animal, the same low, soothing tones he had used when he first spoke to her in town. He was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room or making her feel uncomfortable, but she sensed an awareness between them that went beyond employer and employee. She would catch him watching her sometimes as she worked, his expression thoughtful. Their hands would brush accidentally when they worked together, and she would feel that contact like a spark. During their evening meals, which had become extended conversations ranging over every topic imaginable, she found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never voiced to anyone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the stars emerge. Not marrying, not having a family, he was quiet for a moment, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "I would not say regret exactly. There was a girl once, back when I was 22, rancher's daughter from over by Tucson. We talked about marriage, made plans, but she wanted city life, parties and society and things I could not give her. She married a merchant and moved to San Francisco. I heard she is happy, and I am glad for her. As for me, I always figured the right woman would come along when the time was right. I was not willing to settle for less than what my parents had, that kind of deep partnership where two people make each other better." "That is rare," Olivia said softly, "rare but worth waiting for." He turned to look at her then, his eyes dark in the twilight. "What about you? Pretty woman like you must have left behind a string of broken hearts." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There was someone, a banker's son. We had an understanding, or so I thought. But the moment my father's debts became public, he disappeared faster than morning dew. I realized later that I had never loved him, not really. I loved the security he represented, the promise of a comfortable life. That is not the same thing at all." "No," Tom agreed. "It is not." 3 weeks after her arrival, Ruby went into labor. Tom had been watching for signs, and when the mare's water broke in the early evening, he and Olivia moved her into the foaling stall they had prepared. What followed was a long night of anxiety and wonder. Tom stayed with Ruby, monitoring her progress, ready to intervene if complications arose. Olivia brought water, fresh hay, clean cloths, whatever was needed. She held lanterns and spoke soothingly to the laboring mare and tried not to let her nervousness show. It was nearly midnight when the foal finally arrived, a slippery dark bundle that Ruby immediately began cleaning with devoted attention. Tom checked the newborn carefully, his hands sure and gentle, and then sat back with a satisfied smile. "Healthy colt. Ruby did good." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the foal struggle to its feet on impossibly long legs, searching instinctively for its mother's milk. There was something profound about witnessing new life entering the world, about seeing the immediate fierce bond between mare and foal. She glanced at Tom and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You did good too," he said quietly. "I could not have managed alone. I did not do anything. You were here. That matters more than you might think." They stayed in the barn until they were certain both mother and baby were stable, then walked back to the house through the cool darkness. The night was alive with stars, so many more than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Tom walked close beside her, and when she stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, his hand came to her elbow to steady her. The touch sent warmth racing through her body despite the cool air. At the porch steps, he stopped and turned to face her. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "When you stepped off that train, I was in town picking up supplies. I saw you standing there on the platform, looking so determined and lost at the same time, and something just clicked inside me." Then when you walked up to those horses without a second thought, putting their fear ahead of your own safety, I knew." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I knew I had found what I had been waiting for." She could barely breathe. "Tom, I know it has only been 3 weeks. I know it is probably too soon to say these things, but I have never been good at pretending or hiding what I feel. You have brought life back to this ranch, back to me. It is not just the work you do, though you are the finest hand with horses I have ever seen. It is you. Your courage and your kindness, and the way you find joy in small things. The way you talk to the horses like they are your friends. The way you watch the sunrise like it is a gift given just for you." "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to say anything because I thought maybe I was just grateful for the chance you gave me, for the security and the home. But it is more than that. You make me want to be brave. You make me believe that good things can happen, that not all men are like my father or the one who abandoned me. You make me feel safe and valued and seen." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I am not a wealthy man, Olivia. I have this ranch and these horses and my good name. But I promise you that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. I will never lie to you or hurt you deliberately. I will work myself to the bone to provide for you and any family we might have. And I will count myself the luckiest man in Arizona if you will consider sharing this life with me." She leaned into his touch, her eyes filling with tears that were joy and relief and the overwhelming rightness of this moment. "Wealth is not measured in gold, Tom. It is measured in love and honor and the way someone makes you feel when you wake up in the morning. By those standards, you are the richest man I have ever met." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, as if she was something precious that might break. She kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside, all the loneliness and fear and desperate hope that had carried her across a continent to this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I also know my own heart. Marry me and make this ranch a home. Make my life complete." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 3 weeks later by the minister in Globe, with the wagon driver who had witnessed their first meeting standing as witness. Olivia wore a simple cream-colored dress that the local dressmaker had helped her alter from one of the woman's own designs, and Tom wore his best shirt and a string tie. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but when Tom slipped his mother's ring onto her finger and spoke his vows, Olivia felt the truth of them settle into her bones. "I, Thomas Zimmerman, take you, Olivia Crawford, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by your side in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for all the days of my life. You will never walk alone as long as there is breath in my body." Her own vows came from her heart, unrehearsed but true. "I, Olivia Crawford, take you, Thomas Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with everything I am, to be your partner in building a life together, to stand beside you through whatever challenges we face. You gave me hope when I had none, and I promise to spend my life being worthy of that gift." They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening, inviting a few neighboring ranchers and their families. Someone produced a fiddle, and they danced in the yard as the sun set and the stars emerged. Tom held her close, spinning her in circles while she laughed with pure happiness. When the last guests departed and they were finally alone, he carried her over the threshold of their home as tradition demanded. That night, in the privacy of what was now their shared bedroom, they learned each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Tom was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it felt like a completion, two pieces finding their perfect fit. Afterwards, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, his hand stroking her hair. "Not a single one," she said truthfully. "This feels like coming home." "It is home," he said, "for both of us now." The months that followed were the happiest of Olivia's life. She and Tom fell into a partnership that extended far beyond the physical intimacy of their marriage. They worked side by side every day, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Tom handled the heavy labor and the training of difficult horses, while Olivia managed the day-to-day care and developed a particular skill with the pregnant mares and young foals. Word spread about the Zimmerman ranch and the couple's gentle methods, and people began bringing their horses from greater distances for breeding and training. By the following spring, they had expanded to 25 horses and were discussing building additional corrals. Tom hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing workload, young men from town who were eager to learn. Olivia found herself taking on a teaching role, showing them the careful attention and patience that made the difference between adequate horsemanship and excellence. She also discovered she was pregnant. She suspected it first when she found herself unable to face coffee in the mornings, a dramatic change from her usual habit. When 2 months passed without her monthly courses and her dresses began to feel tight, she knew for certain. She chose to tell Tom one evening after supper, when they were sitting on the porch in their customary spot. "I have something to tell you," she began, suddenly nervous despite their closeness. He turned to her with immediate attention, his expression concerned. "What is wrong? Are you feeling all right? I have noticed you have been tired lately." "I am fine," she assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. Tom, we are going to have a baby." She watched the news register on his face. Shock first, then comprehension, then a joy so pure and complete that it transformed him. He let out a whoop that startled the horses in the nearby corral and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. "A baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby. Olivia, you have made me the happiest man alive." "I was nervous you might think it was too soon," she admitted. "We have only been married 7 months. Too soon. Honey, this is perfect. This is everything I dreamed of when I asked you to marry me. A wife I love, a ranch that is thriving, and now a child on the way. How could anything be more right?" He was tender with her in the months that followed, almost comically concerned about her welfare. He tried to take over all her chores until she firmly informed him that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of working. They compromised on her, avoiding the heavier tasks and taking regular rests, and Tom made sure she ate well and drank plenty of water. In the evenings, he would read to her from the newspaper or books they borrowed from the minister's library, and they would discuss names and make plans for the changes a baby would bring. The summer heat was oppressive as her pregnancy progressed, but Olivia found ways to manage. She worked in the early mornings and late evenings when it was cooler, and spent the hottest part of the day in the house with the windows open to catch any breeze. Tom set up a comfortable chair on the shaded part of the porch where she could sit and do mending or snap beans while still feeling part of the ranch activity. Their closest neighbors, a family named the Harpers, became good friends during this time. Martha Harper was a motherly woman in her 40s who had raised 6 children of her own. She took Olivia under her wing, sharing advice and practical wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth. Her husband Frank and Tom had known each other for years, and the two families often shared Sunday dinners, alternating between the 2 ranches. "You are glowing," Martha told Olivia one afternoon as they sat shelling peas on the Zimmerman porch. "That is the look of a woman who is happy and loved." "Tom is a good man. You chose well." "He chose me," Olivia corrected gently. "I stepped off a train with nothing, and he gave me everything." "You gave him plenty in return, honey. That man was lonely and hardening before you came along. Now look at him, whistling while he works and smiling like he has a secret. Love goes both ways, and do not you forget it." The baby came in late September, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following afternoon. Martha and the local midwife attended her, while Tom paced outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave despite Frank Harper's attempts to take him into town for a drink. When the baby's first cry finally split the air, Tom burst through the door despite Martha's protests about propriety. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right?" His eyes were wild with worry until he saw Olivia propped against the pillows, exhausted but smiling with a tiny bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached almost reverently, and she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, his tiny fists waving in apparent outrage at being expelled from his warm sanctuary. Tom reached out one finger and the baby's hand immediately grasped it with surprising strength. "Our son," Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia, he is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him James after Tom's father. Little James Zimmerman proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with strong lungs and a determined personality. The first months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Olivia had never felt more content. Tom was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring her the baby when James cried, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with his son when colic struck. "My father did not do these things," Tom told her one night as he paced with James against his shoulder. "It was not considered manly back then. But I figure there is nothing more manly than taking care of your family in whatever way they need." She loved him even more for that attitude, for the way he split ranch duties with her so she was never overwhelmed, for the way he protected their small family time even as the ranch business grew. By James's first birthday, the Zimmerman Ranch was one of the most respected horse operations in the territory. They had 40 horses now, and had started specializing in breeding strong, intelligent mounts for ranchers and the cavalry. Tom had built a reputation for absolute honesty in his dealings, and his word was considered as good as a contract. More importantly, their home was filled with laughter and love. James was walking now, toddling around the ranch yard under watchful eyes, fascinated by the horses that had been part of his world since birth. Tom had given him a gentle old mare named Daisy for his very own, and James would pat her nose and babble at her in his baby language, completely fearless. "He is going to be a natural horseman," Tom said proudly, watching his son interact with Daisy. "Just like his mother." "Just like both his parents," Olivia corrected, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. They stood that way for a moment, watching their son explore his world, and Olivia felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the path that had led her here. If someone had told her 3 years ago, as she stood on that train platform with empty pockets and an empty future, that she would find this kind of happiness, she would never have believed them. But Tom had been right that day in town when he said the West only cared about what you could do with the chances you were given. She had been given a chance, and she had grabbed it with both hands. She had worked hard, loved deeply, and built a life that would have seemed impossible in her darkest moments. Looking at Tom, at James, at the thriving ranch spread before them, she understood what Tom had meant when he spoke of wealth. Gold could be lost or stolen. Fortunes could evaporate overnight as her father's had. But love, honor, family, purpose, these things endured. These things made a person rich in ways that mattered. She had arrived with nothing, but she had found everything. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Alina, after Olivia's mother. She was a quieter baby than James had been, content to watch the world with serious gray eyes. James was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and show her his treasures. Tom built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, with 4 bedrooms and a proper parlor. The old house was converted into quarters for the ranch hands, of which they now employed 4 full-time. The ranch continued to prosper. Tom and Olivia had developed a breeding program that was producing exceptional horses, combining the best qualities of strength, intelligence, and temperament. Buyers came from across Arizona territory and beyond, willing to pay premium prices for Zimmerman horses. They could have become wealthy by any standard, but Tom insisted on keeping their operation at a manageable size. "I do not want to build an empire," he told Olivia when she suggested they could expand further. "I want to build a legacy. I want our children to grow up knowing their parents, not just working for distant bosses who happen to share their last name. I want quality over quantity in our horses and in our life." She agreed wholeheartedly. They had more than enough money to live comfortably and save for the future. More importantly, they had time to be a family, to eat meals together and take rides through the beautiful country surrounding their ranch, to watch their children grow and learn and become themselves. When Arizona became a state in 1912, the Zimmermans hosted a celebration at their ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from miles around. James was 23 now, a tall young man who looked remarkably like his father, managing much of the ranch's daily operations. Alina was 21, engaged to a schoolteacher from Globe, planning a spring wedding. Tom's hair had gone silver, and Olivia had laugh lines around her eyes, but they were still completely in love. "Can you believe it has been 29 years?" Tom asked her as they watched their guests dancing in the yard. 29 years since you stepped off that train. 29 years since you took a chance on a desperate woman with empty pockets and no prospects," she said, taking his hand. "Best decision I ever made. Want to know a secret?" He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "That day in town, after I saw you with the horses, I went home and told myself I was going to marry you. I did not know your name, did not know anything about you except that you were kind and brave, and something in my soul recognized you." "You never told me that," she said, surprised. "I did not want you to think I was crazy, but it was true. I looked at you and I just knew. The way my father always said he knew with my mother. One look and everything changed." "Everything did change," she agreed. "You changed my life, Tom. You gave me a home when I had none, a purpose when I was lost, a family when I was alone. You showed me that wealth is not measured in gold but in love." "We showed each other," he corrected. "You think I did not need saving too?" "I was turning into a lonely old bachelor, married to my work, forgetting what it meant to really live. You brought joy back into my life. You gave me children and partnership and laughter. You made me understand what my father was trying to teach me about what really matters." They danced together as the sun set, their children watching with affectionate smiles, their grandchildren playing nearby. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, built on hard work and honest dealing. But more than that, it was built on love. Love between husband and wife, love for the land and the animals they tended, love for the family they had created together. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of a good life well lived. James married a rancher's daughter and built his own house on the property. taking over more and more of the operation as Tom gradually stepped back. Eleanor and her schoolteacher husband settled in Globe, giving Olivia and Tom 4 more grandchildren to dote on. The ranch remained successful through economic ups and downs, partly due to their conservative management and partly due to the sterling reputation they had built. Tom and Olivia grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still took their evening coffee on the porch, still held hands while watching sunsets, still found joy in simple moments together. They had seen the territory become a state, seen automobiles begin to replace horses in town, seen the world change in ways they could never have imagined that day in 1883. But some things never changed. The love between them remained constant, a foundation that had supported them through challenges and celebrated triumphs. The ranch their children now ran still reflected the values Tom and Olivia had established, treating horses with respect and conducting business with integrity. The family they had created still gathered for Sunday dinners, still told stories of the old days, still honored the love story that had begun with a train and a chance meeting. When Tom died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87 with Olivia's hand in his last words were of gratitude. "Thank you for saying yes," he whispered. "Thank you for getting on that train. Thank you for making my life complete." Olivia lived 3 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her fiercely. She spent her days in a rocking chair on the porch of the house Tom had built for her, watching the horses graze in the pastures, remembering a lifetime of love. She told her grandchildren stories of their grandfather, of the man who had looked at a desperate stranger and seen possibility, who had measured wealth in love instead of gold, who had built a legacy that would endure for generations. When she passed in her sleep on a warm June night, with the windows open and the sound of horses whickering softly in the distance, her last thoughts were of gratitude. She had arrived with nothing and found everything. She had been saved and had saved in return. She had loved deeply and been loved completely. She had learned that home was not a place you came from but a place you built, one day at a time, with someone who saw your worth when the world saw only your empty pockets. The Zimmerman Ranch continued long after both its founders had passed. Their great-grandchildren still ran it, still bred exceptional horses, still told the story of Tom and Olivia. The story of how a train brought a desperate woman to a dusty Arizona town, how a cowboy saw her worth when she had $7 to her name, how he offered her work and they found love. How he taught her that wealth was not measured in gold but in the life you built and the people you loved. In Globe, Arizona, there was eventually a historical marker placed near where the old train depot had stood. It told the story of the town's founding, its mining history, its notable residents. Among them, in smaller letters, was a mention of Thomas and Olivia Zimmerman, founders of the successful Zimmerman Horse Ranch. But the marker could not capture the real story, the one that mattered. It could not describe the moment their eyes first met, the gentle patience of their courtship, the deep partnership of their marriage, the family they had created, and the legacy they had left. That story lived on in different ways. In the breeding records of horses that trace their lineage back to Tom's original stock. In the values James and Eleanor had passed to their own children about hard work and integrity. In the house that still stood, lovingly maintained, where multiple generations had been born and raised. In the way people in the area still said, "That's a Zimmerman horse," with respect when they saw an animal of particular quality and gentle temperament. But most of all, the story lived on in the example of what love could build when it was given freely and received gratefully. Tom had given Olivia a chance when she needed one most, but she had given him something equally valuable. Purpose renewed, loneliness ended, life made complete. They had met as strangers, one offering employment and one desperate for it, and had created something that transcended those simple beginnings. Their story became legend in their family, told and retold to each new generation. How great-great-grandmother Olivia had arrived on a train with empty pockets and a determination that would not be broken. How great-great-grandfather Tom had looked at her and seen possibility, had spoken words that became family gospel. Wealth is not measured in gold but in love. How they had built a ranch and a family and a life together that proved those words true. The ranch itself stood as testimony. The land Tom had inherited from his father, that he and Olivia had expanded and improved, that their descendants had continued to nurture. It was not the largest ranch in Arizona or the most famous, but it was known for quality and integrity. Zimmerman horses were still sought after more than a century after Tom and Olivia had refined their breeding program. The ranch employed local people fairly, contributed to the community, maintained the land responsibly. It operated by the principles its founders had established. Work hard, treat all creatures with respect, keep your word, measure success by more than money. When James's grandson, another Thomas, took over management of the ranch in the early years of the 21st century, he had framed on his office wall the only known photograph of his great-great-grandparents. It was formal, taken in a studio in Globe probably around 1890. Tom stood tall and serious in his best suit, one hand on Olivia's shoulder. She sat ramrod straight in a high-necked dress, her hands folded in her lap, but despite the formality of the era's photography, love radiated from the image. The way Tom's hand rested protectively on her shoulder. The way Olivia's slight smile softened her face. The sense of partnership and devotion that somehow transcended the sepia tones and stiff poses. Below the photograph, young Thomas had mounted a small plaque with his great-great-grandfather's words. Wealth isn't measured in gold, but in love. It served as a reminder on hard days when the work seemed overwhelming, when market prices dropped or drought threatened, when the challenges of running a modern ranch seemed insurmountable. Thomas would look at that photograph, read those words, and remember what really mattered. He would think about a woman stepping off a train with empty pockets and enormous courage. About a man who looked past circumstances to see potential. About a love story that had started with a chance meeting and blossomed into a legacy that had lasted more than a century. The ranch was that legacy, yes, but more than that, it was the values they had lived by. The belief that people deserved dignity and fair treatment regardless of their circumstances. The understanding that true wealth came from relationships and purpose, not bank accounts. The knowledge that love, real love, was worth more than gold because it could not be stolen or lost or devalued. It could only grow, strengthening with time and care, creating foundations that supported not just individuals but entire families, entire communities, entire futures. And so the story continued, generation after generation, in the land that was tended and the horses that were raised and the children who were taught what their ancestors had learned. That the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. That courage and kindness can change destinies. That love, freely given and gratefully received, builds legacies that outlast everything else. The train that had brought Olivia to Globe that hot July day in 1883 was long gone. The railroad itself eventually abandoned, as cars and highways replaced iron rails. But what had begun when she stepped onto that dusty platform, everything she and Tom had built together, all the love they had shared and passed on, that endured. That would always endure, as long as there were people who remembered their story and lived by their example. In the end, Tom had been right. Wealth was not measured in gold. It was measured in love, in family, in the legacy you left behind. By that measure, Thomas and Olivia Zimmerman had been the richest people in Arizona territory, then and forever. They had arrived at their meeting with almost nothing, at least in material terms. But they had recognized in each other something precious, something worth more than all the gold in the world. And they had spent a lifetime proving that initial recognition correct, building a love that became legend, a partnership that became family, a choice that became destiny. The ranch still stood, the horses still grazed, the mountains still rose purple and beautiful in the distance. And somewhere in the dust and the wind and the endless Arizona sky, the spirits of Tom and Olivia watched over it all, their love story complete but never ending, their legacy living on in every horse trained with gentle hands, in every partnership built on respect, in every person who chose love over gold and found themselves richer for it. That was their true wealth, their real fortune, the treasure they had discovered together and passed on to everyone who came after. The understanding that love, real love, was the only currency that mattered, the only inheritance worth leaving, the only wealth worth having. And that truth, like their love, would last forever,